It's quite an honor and privilege to be here, and amazing to see so many women studying Daf. What I want to bring before us is a story that already intrigued me in the class that I'm teaching at Pardes, an advanced Talmud class. We're learning Ketubot, and part of what I want to show as I teach the sugya I've chosen in Moed Katan is the intertwining of sugyot in the Gemara, the incredible overlap in the scope and breadth of texts that we see and the way in which they interact with each other. And then I want to move us a little bit towards halacha, because in addition to teaching Gemara, I teach halacha, and I'm always amazed when there's so much compassion as the text moves from theoretical or from a narrative into something that's applied. And so I'm going to share my screen, and in 15 minutes, we're going to go through this story and see some really incredible sources that I think will be a wonderful way to wrap up and celebrate the end of Masechet Moed Katan. So what we have here, what I'm going to be focusing on, is actually the curious story of Yosef HaKohen. I said Rav Yosef, apologies, I was on my way to Poland and I didn't have a chance to check the text, but it's Yosef HaKohen. And we'll see it in a moment. It was on Daf 23 of Moed, so not Moed Katan, not that long ago. But I'm actually going to take us back even a little bit earlier. Meta ishto v'nasa isha acheret, eino rashai likanes lebeito ledaber imo tanchumim. So we find out if a man's wife dies and he marries another woman, and the understanding is within 30 days of his first wife's death. Part of what we're going to be unpacking today is, when is a man allowed to marry so quickly, despite the mourning for his wife? When is he allowed to marry so quickly or remarry so quickly? But we're going to answer that in a moment. So you're not allowed to walk into his house where the second wife is now presiding to speak words of consolation to him, even though you really are supposed to continue consoling for Shloshim. Matzao b'shuk, but if you find the man in the marketplace, omer lo b'safa rafa u'v'koved rosh. So in the marketplace, you can speak to him with gentle words and in a serious manner. And Rashi basically says, v'nosei isha b'toch shloshim yom, within the shloshim, kagon she'en lo banim. One of the examples, it's a bit of a spoiler, right? That if he doesn't have children, one allows a man to remarry very quickly to fulfill pru or vu. And why aren't you allowed to come into his house? L'nachamo, to comfort him. Mishum chalishat dat disha achrona. Now, Rashi says because it will cause distress to the new wife, to the latest wife. And part of what I want to show you in this text, and it really triggered a lot of interest in me, this question of sensitivity in remarriages and the tension between remembering the first wife as one goes into a marriage with another person. There's going to be so much sensitivity in Rashi and Tosfot in how they read the Gemara, that really, it just reminds me how humane, right? There were people reading these texts, and while sometimes they seem sterile or very far away, in the interpretation, we see the compassion and the humanity. Not always, right? I'm bringing a text that I found particularly moving. And I'll just say, I'm teaching Ketubot, the sugya that cross-references the Moed Katan sugya is a bride or groom whose mother or father, the mother of the bride or the father of the groom, die on the eve of the wedding. What a tragedy, right? And how do you handle that situation? And in that, on that daf, you have a cross-reference to this sugya in Moed Katan. So Tana Rabbanan, this is where we find Yosef HaKohen. Kol shloshim yom lenisuin meta ishto asur lisha acheret ad sheyavru alav shlosha regalim. So we find out, normally you cannot remarry during shloshim, regardless of the type of avilut. And if your wife dies, you should wait 3 regalim. 3 holidays should pass. We're going to find 3 possible suggestions why you wait that long. It's not necessarily a full year, but 3 holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, have to pass. And Rabbi Yehuda says, Regel Rishon V'Sheni Asur Shlishi Mutar. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's too much. 2 regalim is enough. So I want to bring you the Tosafot, right? Again, a really insightful understanding of the complexity of this situation. Ad Sheyavru Shlosha Regalim, Ad Sheyesh Shlosha Regalim Below Simcha V'lo Yishkach Ahavat Ishto. So you should not have 3 regalim, because a man should have a period of mourning to remember the love of his wife, the love of his first wife. Inami, the Tosfot says that's not all. Kidei she'isa sha'acheret v'lo yeh zachor min harishona shelo yeh bet deot b'mita. So now the Tosfot say, so that if he remarries too quickly, he may be remembering his first wife at a moment of intimacy with his second wife. That's very confusing and also not considerate, perhaps, or sensitive enough to the complexity of this situation and the sensitivity of the second wife. He may remember the first wife in order likanter, to complain about the second wife. In other words, the Tosafot say you need a period of mourning in order to create a transition, in order to create a space in which you can move into another relationship. And there's complexity here, except what does the Gemara remind us? Now we're back in the Gemara. V'im ein lo banim mutar lisa la'alter mishum bitul perio rivia. If he doesn't have children, then he's actually allowed to remarry immediately to fulfill pru or vu. Heinicha lo banim ktanim mutar lisa la'alter mimnei parnasatan. If he has small children, he can remarry immediately because of the small children. And I just want to say, until the mid to late 20th century, really, it was assumed men could not take care of small children. That if a wife died, the grandmother, the aunts, there are stories of men who tried to fight to keep their small children. The children were taken away by family members, right? It was considered absolutely unthinkable that a man could take care of small children. The children would be at risk. Man had to go to work. And so what we have here is, for the sake of the children, Va'amar ma'aseh shemeta ishto shel Yosef HaKohen, the wife of Yosef HaKohen dies, and he says la'achota beveit hakfarot, he turns to her sister in the cemetery, lechi ufarnesi et bnei achotech, not the most romantic of marriage proposals, but essentially he's saying, go and take care of your sister's children. In other words, go back to the home where, I'm going to marry you because we can't be beyichud, obviously, without marriage. And that's his proposal. Now the Gemara now says, the editor says, well, obviously lo ba'ala ela b'zman merubah. He doesn't have relations. This was not because of sexual desire or need. Don't think that would be unthinkable. But because of the children. And then the Gemara says, ma'ilazman merubah amar papa la'achar shloshim yom, until the end of shloshim. That's how long they wait. Now, what ends up happening is there's a long Tosfot, which I'm going to summarize, right? The question of what is happening here, what's man merubah? But there's one line in the Tosfot that I found, I remember it from when I was at Matan, when I was very young, one of the first Masechet I learned, and really, when you say what sticks with you, the Tosafot basically say, what is unique about Yosef HaKohen and the sister-in-law? Basically, what they say is as follows, that Shani hatam lefi shehi terachem al bnei achota yoter me'acheret. The turning to the sister-in-law at the cemetery is there's an understanding that the aunt of these orphan children will have more compassion over the orphans than any other woman. And that again speaks to the complexity of bringing another woman into the home to raise another woman's children. The idea that the aunt will have allegiance, will have loyalty, will have particular love for these children. And that makes her a worthy wife, a worthy second wife. I remember that. I wasn't even married. I remember that stuck with me, that insight, that in this particularly difficult situation, the stepmother being the aunt, which may make us a little uncomfortable, but has happened over the thousands of years. It appears in various responsa. There was a movie Rama Burstein made about it, Into the Void, that the young sister-in-law marries the brother-in-law after her sister dies tragically, leaving a baby, right? They play with that idea that there's a certain amount of compassion. And so as jarring as the story is, in the space around the story, we are invited to recognize the complexity, the need for compassion, and begin thinking what is best for the children, because they are left very vulnerable, in addition, of course, to the husband. And so what I want to end with in the last few moments I have is what happens in the Shulchan Aruch. What we really have, first of all, in order to make Yosef HaKohen a little more kosher, if you will, there's a Gaonic tradition that this is Erev Pesach. So Shiva ends as we go into the holiday of Passover. And so you don't have the discomfort. Wait, he really married her during Shiva, during the 7 days? That seems unseemly. So the Gaonic tradition, which gets passed on, is it was Erev Pesach. And so we get around a little bit the discomfort with someone getting married during Shiva. Okay, so that's just, again, a little bit of how interpretation works, how narratives are passed on. What we get to here in the Shulchan Aruch is the mourner is forbidden to take a wife during the entire 30 days. Okay, we know that. If his wife died, he is forbidden to take another wife until 3 festivals have gone by her death. The Mordechai says something very interesting. What about a woman? How long does she have to wait to remarry? Look what the Mordechai says. A woman does not have to wait until 3 festivals have gone by before remarriage, because it's more important for her to be married than to be single, and consequently she is more apt to forget her former husband after 30 days of mourning and devote herself to her new partner. I'm not loving the interpretation. It's based on the fact that the Gemara does not make a woman wait. She has to wait to make sure she's not pregnant, but she doesn't have to wait 3 regalim. And they come up with this idea, this paradigm, that women immerse themselves fully in marriage, whereas a man may be still thinking about his first wife. Again, these paradigms or these categories are perhaps not completely accurate, but they are trying to get at differences in relationship. Okay, let's keep going. If he has not complied with the duty of propagation, or if he has small children, or, and this is very interesting, if he has no one to attend to him, this gets added in the Rambam already. Small children, no children, and what about a man who can't take care of himself? And the Gemara already knows, the Midrash, a man will bring home wheat, but he can't cook the wheat. He'll bring home flax, but he can't make clothing out of flax. This idea that there are men that cannot care for themselves, grooming, hygiene, feeding themselves, and so on. I remember a New York Times article that came out many years ago showing that men alone who lose their spouses have a shorter lifespan than women who lose their spouses at a certain age. Why? Because men, they don't take care of themselves, neglect. I hope that statistic has changed, but we understand there's something real here. And what happens? He should not cohabit with her until after 30 days, unless, of course, he hasn't done pru or vu, and then he just has to wait till after Shiva. Now look at what the Ramah adds. The same principle applies to mourning. Okay, we're going to keep on. Some say that even one who is wealthy and can afford to hire men and women servants, yet if his daughter or daughter-in-law are not present with him at home, so that they are unable to attend him. And now look what the Ramah adds. Again, here's where I see sensitivity going back down to the little details. Cleansing of his head or other private matters, right? He doesn't want his male or female servants seeing certain uncomfortable aspects of his body. Now, why he'd want his daughter and daughter-in-law is another question, but they're not living at home. Better that way. For he feels embarrassed when others do this to him. The law is this man is allowed to remarry, even if he's wealthy, even if he's able to hire servants. There are certain things that are really only appropriate for a spouse, for a wife to take care of. So we understand the no children, pru or vu. We understand the small children. A father is thought incapable. He needs help, and maybe the children will be in danger. But now, from Maimonides on, we begin to look at a different kind of man. A man who doesn't have small children, has children, but he struggles to care for himself. And I would add to this the loneliness, right? And this need for a spouse to know some of the most private things about himself. He doesn't want a servant to know that. He doesn't want his daughter or daughter-in-law, in my opinion, to know that. I would add that to the Ramah. And it is for this reason the custom has spread that many people adopt a lenient view and take wives within the period of 3 festivals. And the Ramah says, with all due respect to the Tanakama and the Gemara and Rabbi Yehuda says 2 festivals, the reality is people really are, in reality, practical reality. There are situations in which people need this leniency, and a conscientious person should bethink himself. Okay, a chassid should try bal nefesh, but who gets to decide what that means? A lot of room opened for personal decision-making, agency in this very sensitive area. And now, if I'm allowed one more minute, I'd like to say there's something intriguing at the end of the Ramah. This is the kind of thing that always has me going searching. What is the story? One who was seized by the governor, and the latter refuses to let him go from his detention until he takes a wife within three festivals after his wife's death. Some permit him to remarry on account of his suffering, and this seems to me to be the fundamental principle. Now, I have to say, the first time I saw this Ramah, I was preparing it for my class in Ketubot. I had no idea what this was talking about. What is the governor? What are you talking about? What is going on? So, of course, I had to do some sort of backward searching, and I discovered in Rav Meir of Rottenburg, again, 12th century, a bizarre scenario where a governor takes hold of a man, a Jewish man. We don't know the whole story. Is it because he wants this man to marry his sister-in-law, the Jewish woman in town who wants, I don't know, but he says to the man, marry this woman or I'm putting you in jail. The man's a widower. He's supposed to wait 3 regalim. He's not without children. He doesn't have small children. The Maharam does not allow it, which I find particularly painful because the Maharam spent 7 years in jail and he knows how complicated jail is. And he says, yeah, jail is really hard, but you can get through it. So the Maharam actually does not allow the man to remarry within 3 regalim. That's a moment where I struggle a little. Why is the Maharam being so stringent? But I can't ask. Okay, the Beit Yosef of Yosef Karo re-examines this scenario and says jail is real suffering. And if we allow a man without children, a man with small children to remarry, we should make an allowance here. He doesn't put it in the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah puts it in and brings the story of the governor, the bizarre story of the governor that appears in the Maharam. And he says, if a governor seizes you and says, get married, or I'm putting you in jail, there's room to permit this, right? And so that really, for me, closed the door or, finalized a story that had started 300 years earlier. And I'm like, oh, it took a couple of 100 years. The Maharam is saying, look, I need to be careful about directly overriding a Gemara. But the Beit Yosef says, what about tsar? What about suffering? Maybe his life is even in danger, right? The Maharam doesn't seem to think his life is in danger, and so on. And so what I really wanted to show you, again, first of all, the Moed Katan and Ketubot Sugyot are talking to each other. It's really quite wonderful. We have this story with Yosef HaKohen and his getting married right there in the graveyard, basically on the way home from the cemetery. The Gaonim say that's Erev Pesach, makes it a little more comfortable. And the Tosafot remind us the aunt is the best mother for these children. And, and there's a true rightness, a truth, a yosher in Yosef HaKohen turning to her and saying, we need to do this right now. And then, as I showed you through the halachic, the years of halachic interpretation, recognizing in addition the no children, the small children, and the man who is struggling to care for his basic needs that we're going to make an allowance for. And then I ended with this curious story, even more curious than Yosef HaKohen, the governor, and brought what I hope is a happy ending. So a little bit of Torah to celebrate the end of Moed Katan. You should all go forward. Lech l'shalom, right? There's a lot of a journey left in our learning, whatever learning you choose. And congratulations.